Hello, friends, and welcome to the Living Truth podcast. I am Kristin, Cary, hosting, and so eager and grateful to reconnect with my friend, Anna Christine Seipel. Anna, it has been more than 10 years since we've seen each other, and I am so delighted to have you as a guest on our podcast. Thank you for being here with me today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's such a joy to see you as well.
Yeah. You guys, Anna I'm gonna ask her to take the lead in talking a little bit about where our paths crossed over a decade ago. Let me tell you a little bit about her first. She is a licensed counselor and is currently getting her doctorate degree in Scotland. She has gone through so much of her own personal pain and trauma and is passionate about connecting the things she has learned personally about healing with her work as a licensed counselor. I just read her book, which is The Sacred Art of Slowing Down, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it was a breath of fresh air. I read it during my sabbatical, which is perfect timing, where I was able to savor and slow down, something we don't do enough of in today's fast-paced world. And Anna, in this book and in her work, does an incredible job of weaving together the complexity of theology and spirituality with the complexity of our psychology, our bodies. And the reality is, in our Western world, we think of these things all separately. Like we have separate areas of study for all these things, but God made us interwoven, interconnected. Our nervous system, our bodies, our hearts, our minds, our spirit, the spiritual realm. All of these things, we like to separate them all out, and they're all so incredibly intertwined and interconnected. And Anna does such a great job of explaining that in a way that is human and accessible.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to just turn it over to you, Anna, and let you share whatever you'd like to about how and why our paths first crossed more than a decade ago, and what your journey has been since.
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you for your kind words. I appreciate them so much. And yeah, I remember before I met you, I think we figured out there was actually a time we randomly crossed paths and didn't put it together until later, like at a conference that we were both at. But the time that we intentionally met, I had been serving in campus ministry, and I had my life completely turned upside down. My spouse of 5 years, I found out, had been not just struggling with sexual purity in ways that I had categories for at the time, in ways that I had been, taught about, or things that I was aware of. I learned that there was this whole other narrative of life happening that I was completely unaware of. And at that time, the ministry that I was working for gave me your number and said, hey, these are people, well, both of you, you and your husband. So these are people that we think can help, that can walk alongside you. And what was so distinctive to me was that I had mentors and friends and well-meaning people, try to enter in and witness and walk alongside and help, but like really just no one got it. And no one really had a category for like the depth of like shock and trauma that I was just faced with, that, I had no categories for. But you got it. And I just remember that from the very first time sitting down with you, of feeling so seen and so understood, and so like held by that in a way. It was so beautiful and so clear how gifted you were, and how you were right where God had you to be, using those giftings and blessing others. And I mean, that turned into months of you walking alongside me while I was in Indianapolis, and being someone who was so kind to me, who encouraged me to be kind to myself. As I was saying a minute ago, as we hopped on here, I mean, that's one of my first memories of someone really encouraging me to treat myself with kindness and even creating a category for that. And when I think about, even tying it into this book that I just wrote, something I've often said to people is what the book became was sharing sacred spaces that had shaped me. And when I think about like the lineage of people, all of these people that God has placed in my life to cultivate these really beautiful, healing, sacred spaces, you are absolutely, one of them. So it's such a sweet, like full circle moment. But yeah, I'll start there and let you maybe take it from there.
Okay, so many things. I mean, so much we could talk about. So, Anna, especially because so many of our listeners are women going through betrayal.
Yeah.
And here you are, how many years later? I mean, what year was it when I met you?
We met in 2014.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So here you are,
Mm.
12-ish years later, maybe. I mean, I don't remember
Yeah.
what time of the year it was, and you have a whole
Mm.
big, beautiful other life trajectory that never would have been possible had your
Mhm.
life not blown up the way it did, which I hate that you went through that.
Mhm.
But it opened doorways, even
Yeah.
through the unspeakable pain of loss in so
Mhm.
many ways,
Mhm.
for you to have this incredible life. I think that's so helpful for our listeners who are stuck in it. And friends, if you're listening and you're like, but that's a lot of years, 12 years. It didn't take Anna that long to really start to see light and joy and hope and
Mhm.
healing again. But I love seeing life through your perspective now. And I felt like I got to do that when I read your book,
Mhm.
see life through your lens and your eyes, because it is so inspirational. The things that we really need to heal are not as complicated as we make them to be.
Yeah.
Slowing down, listening to what our body is telling us. And
Mhm.
one point I want to ask you about is this idea that many of us have as Christians of like, no, the body is bad. It's, there are some scripture verses that get taken out of context. And we
Yeah.
think that like your mind, your thought life, and your belief system,
Mhm.
and which translates to faith for a lot of people, is what's really important. And
Mhm.
so talk to me more about your own journey with realizing, no, actually, I really have to slow down. I really have to listen to my body and what it's telling me. And then also with that, where this idea that our body should be completely ignored and neglected in terms of
Mhm.
listening to them comes from. Where does that idea come from among Christians?
Yeah.
That's a
Yeah.
compound question. I think you can handle it though.
I know, there's so many thoughts. Where do I
I know,
start?
right?
I'll say, in terms of you know, why did I even start slowing down? Why was that a formative thing in my life to then want to write about and have that be like the framework and kind of the bedrock of, in the book, going by three movements of slowing down, tuning in with the body, and tending to the soul of, why do I start there with slowing down? Something I love to be very clear about. I am not good at that. And I did not choose that. It was really out of trauma and chronic health issues, which, as many of us know, those are not independent of each other, right?
Right.
There's an
Right.
interplay of that, right? Of the impact that trauma takes on our health. And I even remember the year I was in Indianapolis and meeting with you, a doctor that I was working with. I had some really concerning things in terms of my body was nearly shutting down at one point. And a doctor just kind of looking at me like, I can tell you have an incredible amount of stress in your life. I do not know what's happening, but like you need to somehow escape this stress because your body like is actually shutting down. And and there's the sassy, fiery parts of me that are like, oh, I would love to just, make it that simple, which is generally not. And so I had long-standing chronic health issues that mixed with trauma, mixed with prolonged stress, just got to the point where I had to slow down. I had to listen, whether it was a time when I broke both of my feet, but really more future times where my body just couldn't keep sustaining the go, 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 right, that I was used to. And then having really sweet, safe people invite me into slowness. And I talk about this with some people in my book of a therapist I worked with and a spiritual director that I worked with who really kind of held my hand in facing those different rhythms, trying to make my way into those different cadences that didn't feel natural to me yet.
In fact, didn't they even kind of feel scary because slowing
Oh my
down
gosh,
creates space
yes.
to feel things that we've been trying to keep
Yes.
locked in the basement, so to speak.
Yes. And that I think that can be so hard. I'll never forget one of my counseling professors in seminary talking about, I think it was actually in a class on trauma. And he was making the point of like yanking someone out of denial, depending on the scenario, that can actually sometimes be the most cruel thing that we can do. There are times that denial is God's grace, right? And I do think there are seasons where being busy or having noise, I do think there are times that can be a grace, right? And so I think what's really hard is it's like, what is the safety that we need and what does it look like to cultivate safety so that the safest thing in front of us isn't a busy go, go, go life with all this noise, but we have what we need for it to be safe enough to slow down. We have what we need for it to be safe enough for there to be that space to feel what we're feeling, think what we're thinking, be really vulnerably present with another person. I mean, there's intimacy in just being present and slowly being there with another person that can be really terrifying and overwhelming. So yeah, I think there are so many things that slowing down is so simple and yet it's also so complex, um, for a number of reasons. And your second question, um, the body, the body being bad. Do we listen to the body? Where do these things come from? I so when I went to seminary, my counseling colleagues thought I was crazy because I did a second master's in biblical studies, studying Hebrew and Greek. I was just at a point in my life where I'd had enough scripture thrown at me in ways that were really harmful and damaging that I wanted to dig in and see, okay, what does scripture say? I'd actually already been teaching myself biblical Hebrew before I went to seminary. And I am a bit of a language nerd, but without totally going down biblical studies and theological rabbit holes, like you said, there are verses that can be taken out of context, where there's a certain, theological point that's trying to be made or something that's being said in a way that is symbolic and not necessarily meant to be literal of, so even things around like terms of flesh, which is like sarx, versus soma, which would be body. These terms in the Greek, Paul plays with those and how he tries to make certain theological points. And if we don't understand that, it's really easy to take things out of context and twist them. And for me, what really led me down the road of, can I listen to my body? Does that make sense? Is that a part of spirituality? Not even do I do that in this separate category of counseling, but like, is that part of my spiritual formation? It was reading the Psalms. It was reading the Psalms and seeing how embodied these people's cries were, whether they were cries of joy or cries of lament and grief. And then also seeing embodiment in the New Testament, in the Gospels. I talk about this whenever I talk about Greek. I love, my favorite Greek word describes Jesus having compassion as him being so moved that he feels it in his innards, like in his guttural organs. And I just think that's so so beautiful. So I'll pause there before I get too excited and go down the
Well,
language tracks.
I have a whole lesson in Women in the Battle about that word, about Jesus.
Mhm.
It's called Jesus moved with compassion for
Yeah.
you. Because, and I love that. Look no further than Jesus to see somebody who was fully embodied,
Yes.
who felt and honored emotions, because emotions
Yes.
get a bad rap a lot of times among
Hmm.
Christians, and
Hmm.
the body gets a bad rap a
Yeah.
lot of times.
Yeah.
Um, so you're saying that it's the taking of theological or verses of scripture and taking them out of their original context that
Hmm.
creates this idea that, oh, you should beat your body and make it your slave and ignore, isn't
Yeah.
weren't there also cultural things?
What I was going to say is it's taking them out of context and seeing them through a lens that we don't realize is distorting them. And
Yes.
so for a lot of us, again, I had another professor in seminary who he would talk about it's like we all have glasses. We all have
Yeah.
lenses on that impact how we see the world. And if we don't realize how those lenses shape things, so like right now, as I'm holding my glasses in front of the screen, you're blurry without them because these are prescriptions. But when I put them here, I can see more clearly when I put them close to the screen. I see it differently. And so when we have these lenses on that are impacted by cultural ideas, philosophical ideas, so things like you named before that in the West, the separation of body and mind, right? Versus well, God actually created the whole person. I mean, even the way that we think about the soul, this is one of the things I think can be most mind bending for Christians. But biblical scholars will say that in the context of the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament, the word soul, they would have had no concept of that being like this separate thing of like dividing ourselves up into all these categories like we do. But there's this holistic, like whole embodied self in that. And when Jesus is quoting verses with that same language, that's also what's being carried with it. It's not until these later philosophical ideas are just normal to us that we separate ourselves into body, soul, heart, mind, and then reduce ourselves to our mind, our thinking brain, and think, oh, that's all that matters, as if that's all that God created when He created the whole person.
I love that so much. I think of people that I care about, like women in my groups, or like I know men that my husband is ministering to, and men in the battle, men who are struggling with so much shame over their sexual behavior, right? And I
Mm-hmm.
think of the shame that these men and women are carrying
Yeah.
about the things that they're thinking, and the somewhat out of control
Mm-hmm.
nature that is inherent in the
Mm-hmm.
vortex of trauma with betrayal.
Yeah.
And then for these men, this is not an excuse for their unwanted sexual behavior, right? And many of us, like you and I, we have to end a relationship because a person will not change their behavior. And
Yeah.
it's too damaging. I mean, it's a covenant breach. It's a
Mm-hmm.
um, God made provision for divorce in that kind of situation for a reason, to protect us. But for those who are okay, so for a lot of people struggling with unwanted sexual behavior, there are so many trauma roots to that behavior that led
Mm-hmm.
them to the acting out in the first place. And if they don't tend to that depths of what happened to them
Yes.
on a body, soul, spirit, heart, mind, and will level, which is
Mm-hmm.
slow, painful work,
Yeah.
then there's just this getting stuck in, well, I got to clean up my mind. I got to clean up my mind, which is
Mm-hmm.
like the attic, if you will. Only, I mean, like when
Yeah.
there's like, there's a sinkhole in the foundation, in the very foundation,
Mm-hmm.
which is
Oh
kind of
yeah.
what trauma does, right? It creates these
Mm-hmm.
fractures and sinkholes, and we try to cover it up
Yeah.
and manage it, but you can't. You
Mm-hmm.
cannot. You cannot manage these things. You have to
Yeah.
surrender to a healing process.
Yeah. Well, I think the most heartbreaking thing about what you're naming there is I think what has become so normal in so many Christian spaces is to, like you said, like with these fractures or these fragments, we say, okay, this part of me is bad. This
Yeah.
part of me is the problem. And then we're actually cultivating a much greater internal conflict that is likely to only make the problem worse, only make us more exhausted and more confused about why things are getting worse, why we can't just, get it together or get in control of our thoughts. Because if we're reducing ourselves to just our thoughts and behaviors, that's one sliver of the whole of who we are. If we're not working together, right? If we're not a unified whole, that's going to have a lot of implications for how we move through life, let alone how we move through trauma, how we move through healing, how we move through growth. And that's where, one of my strongest convictions in all of this is that God is not just concerned with restoring one sliver of our thinking brain that's, most logical and that we most want to value, but just this overwhelming, sense of God's interested in the whole thing, right? He's interested in the whole person. Like, I think God's scope for redemption and healing is so far greater than we could imagine, where it's like, wait, even that part of me, even that depth of me, even that sinkhole. And yeah, I think any ways that we can, and I think this is hard, scary work, because we can be the first ones to say, well, no, I don't want that part of me as part of me. Right? Like,
Totally.
we can
We reject
imagine.
parts of ourselves. Yes.
Exactly. Where it's like, okay, when I think about restoration, healing, redemption, it's like, I don't want that part to be part of it. Like, surely that means like I cut this, limb off and figure out how to keep going. And it's like, well, what if there are actually spaces for restoration and care and tending where there's been really deep wounding, like you're naming, of trauma, and that's messy and complex. It's certainly not simple, and that's where, even though I never intended to write a book about slowing down, and when going through the book, it's certainly not just about slowing down, but that being kind of the backbone of slowing down creates space to connect with our bodies and tend to the depths of the soul in a way that we really cannot do without slowing down. You can't speed it up. You can't make it more convenient. You can't make it a fast food. You can't make it a mail for order, prescription drug. It's a,
And there is no formula,
yeah,
and it's not linear.
yeah. Oh no, no, no. Yeah. I think my publisher, there were moments where I could see they so wanted things to be more linear. And I just kept saying, I'll put it in a book format. But other than that, I'm not going to try to give a formula or make something linear that's not, and wanting to hold space for it to be something that's much more cyclical, something that's much more, organically you find your way through and go back. And yeah.
Which I think is so healing, because so many people think, well, if I'm in this intensity of anger again, clearly I've done something wrong because I've already done this anger thing.
Yeah.
And I like to look at it like if there's a spiral staircase,
yeah,
that goes from a deep, dark pit, up, 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 and there's more and more light the higher you go, but you're cycling through all of these same emotions, all of these human emotions, and that doesn't mean you've done it wrong. It means you're ready to lean into another layer.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and with that, it makes me think of, the Psalms are not just some like random obscure thing that's a manuscript found in the desert that we're like, oh yeah, this was somewhere practiced by a sect of people in ancient times. It has been preserved as sacred scripture. And you think about the emotions, like so many of our English translations, let me just tell you, as someone who knows and loves Hebrew, the Hebrew is so much more like visceral and vivid and guttural than what is often portrayed in the English. It's really hard in the English to portray just how strong these things are that are being expressed, right? And I love that from what we know of their traditions, it's not like Psalms were just experienced or read or sung once in a lifetime. No, they were sung and recited over and over again through a lifetime. And I think there's so much beauty in that because of the like permission that it cultivates of like, this is actually already a part of this faith tradition to have space to not just cry these things out. There are many times where it talks about like the soul or the heart roaring or growling. And I love that.
It's like this total permission to be human, to be in primal pain,
Yes. Yes.
to struggle, even to struggle with God.
Yeah. Yeah. To ask questions that don't feel like pretty questions to ask, right? Questions of like, am I allowed to ask, where are you? Am I allowed to ask, how long? Am I allowed to cry out accusing you of like, why are you hiding yourself? But we see that.
It's in the Psalms.
Yeah. Preserved as
Totally.
sacred scripture.
Right. I think that is so encouraging. Um, okay, Anna, there's so many questions I have for you. Here's one question I have for you, but going back to your story and your experience.
Mhm.
Um, can you kind of describe to me I know you were talking about in your early days of betrayal when you had these health crises that erupted and your body was kind of shutting down and your mind is like, yeah, I'd love to be able to slow down, but like, how is that practical? I would just love for you to share more about that journey for you to kind of come into more alignment with your mind and your body, for you to start recognizing that what your mind wanted, which is, get over it, fix it, move through it,
Yeah.
how you came into alignment with, no, like I actually cannot do that. I'm going to start going in a new direction. Was that when you started going to school to become a therapist, or how did that experience kind of become part of your story?
Yeah. I mean, for a long time, my chronic health issues, I kind of kept in their own category, right? They kind of had their own compartment. I tried to deal with them. I tried to tune out the pain. And it was genuinely, it was the only way I knew how to survive it because I had chronic pain from a really young age, had severe chronic fatigue from a young age. So, I mean, these were pre-existing things from the time I was a child. They got worse as I got older. And, um, you know, I had worked with actually a really phenomenal doctor when I was in Indianapolis, a different doctor than the one I mentioned before. I had many doctors I was working with. And he was very integrative, very holistic. And um, there were ways that while I was open to trying to understand how things are more holistic, one, I think I just didn't get it. And two, even if I got it, I don't know that I really had the space to like embrace it or kind of try it on, if that makes sense. And so I would say it was in my program as, becoming a counselor while I was simultaneously going to counseling, so week in and week out, I'm in therapy and then I'm going to school to become a counselor and really seeing slowly, okay, these things are not disconnected. And it really was, there was such a pivotal moment that wasn't pivotal in the moment. It was like it got drawn out for months. It was a slow process for me. I was a slow learner in this way. But my therapist said to me, I was getting quite triggered. I was dating my now husband. And, when you've gone through betrayal, there are things that seem so tiny or insignificant to other people that can be massively triggering to you. And you don't always know how massively triggering they're going to be until you come up against them. And that can be frustrating, right? Because it's like, wait, I thought I healed from this. I thought I did the therapy. I thought I did the things. So, I'm like psychoanalyzing myself to my therapist and I'm frustrated. And she just looked at me so patiently and so kindly and so calmly and said, your body doesn't know that you're safe. And I look back on that and I see that as such a pivotal moment that like the months around that is really where there was a shift. But it was so slow for me that it was like it couldn't happen like this. It was like this, but there was molasses all over it and it made it happen so slowly.
Yes.
um, but it was having that support of like it was safer to learn about it as head knowledge in school first. And then to have the safe space to go in therapy to kind of detangle that of what does that look like in my own life, in my own body. And that was hard because that wasn't something that I could just master intellectually, right? There was a different kind of vulnerability to connect with that. And there was a mysteriousness about that of letting God be God and getting curious about, his creation in new ways.
Mm. I don't know about you, but when I was younger, I really thought I understood stuff. Like I really thought I knew things, even, whether it was theology or how God works or how people, what makes people tick or whatever. And then the older I get, the more I'm like, wow, there's a
Mm-hmm.
lot of mystery. There's a lot of complexity. There's a lot of stuff that just completely bypasses logic.
Mm-hmm.
I'm still astounded by how deeply some of the earliest patterns of thinking from our youngest years stay
Oh,
with
yeah.
us and impact these different parts of us that we don't
Mm-hmm.
like about ourselves.
Yeah.
And it is such a journey.
Yeah.
Is there anything else you want to share, with our listeners, especially coming from this background of um, going through, a lot of these listeners having gone through betrayal or dealing with and struggling with unwanted sexual behavior about this topic? And then I am going to have another episode here with Anna where we talk even more deeply about some of the topics we've brought up today, but also going into some other topics I think are really important. But are there any kind of closing statements that you want to make to our listeners
Mm-hmm.
from your experience and your work and your knowledge?
Yeah. I think what I would most want to say is those tender depths inside that we sometimes don't even know are there, that we have sometimes lived so disconnected from or neglected without even knowing it, not even trying, but kind of just patterning, what we've experienced of others, that they are so worthy of care. They're so worthy of slowing down with, intending to, and that God and others can hold that space and that compassion when we don't yet have it. We can borrow that from others. Um, and and yeah, that's really what I think, if I could boil down what I tried to put together in these pages was a safe space to start to dip the toe into that and to really experience from another human of every single part of you matters. Yeah.
I love that. And every single part of you is there for a reason
Mm-hmm.
and is worthy of love. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's so important. We will put information about how to connect with Anna and links to her book and her website and all of that in our show notes, friends. And just thank you so much, Anna, for bringing your whole self. Your heart is just beautiful. I love the things that God is revealing to you and how you've shared this with our audience. Friends, if you have not already, would you take a moment to rate and review the Living Truth podcast? That just gives more people the option or the opportunity to find us when they go looking for a podcast about these sensitive topics that we cover. And until the next episode, I'm holding out hope for you.